Right, so as you can see, the Lyric is now completely back together, and so is the remote, and the giant pile of junk in my living room here is now gone. Cleaned up not too bad. There's still a couple of dings in it that I really can't repair, and a couple other battle scars. But other than that, most of everything was here. There's still a lot of... One thing I was finding a lot of was that there is a lot of screws missing. Like, it's obvious someone at some point, or the last person who owned this was in... Well, they weren't really the most respectful to the equipment. So there's a lot of places where I'm finding screws which aren't supposed to be, or they're the wrong size, or just the wrong type of screw, or just screws just completely missing. I got entire panels in some spots here where just there's no screws on, like that door there. If we go around to the side, it's not incredibly heavy. There we go. We can take a look at the back side. And there's all of our wiring just for the heads and the volume controls there. And this is one particular ding that I wasn't able to get out. Thankfully, it's on the back side, so no one's ever going to see it. And that all straightened out quite nicely. Same with right here. That straightened out not too bad. Again, missing screws. I've had to sacrifice a screw from up here for this metal panel so that I could keep this panel here shut, and still a lot of XLR cables I got to make for that. I changed out, I think you may be able to see here, yes, I changed out the 240 volt plug for something a little bit more decent, and these plugs are fantastically massive. I love them so much. Remote controls all wired in, and just a ridiculous amount of cables. One thing I managed to figure out, there's this extra 25 pin cable here. I'm not entirely sure what this is supposed to wire to. There's no connections on the back for it, and it's marked, well, Lyrec TR532, which is the tape machine. But if I can just spin this thing around again. After a lot of very careful cleaning, and there was a couple of small repairs I had to do, the moment of truth finally came. I had to turn the machine on, and did it work? Well, in this particular case here, it does turn on, but that's because the first few times were a couple of nasty false starts. In fact, the first time I pushed the power button, I was rewarded with a bang and pink smoke. Okay, that was actually kind of a good thing. That was a tantalum capacitor on one of the back regulators blowing up. 40-year-old tantalum, totally to be expected. Tried it again. I blew another tantalum down in the drivers here, and I think it was in this board up here that actually had it blow out, but that was also clipped and removed. And we tried it again, and things began working. You can switch between 30 and 60. The edit control worked. I ignored the stop button, and I went directly over to the tape direction button here, and that resulted the moment I pushed it that there was another short I wasn't aware of on the hours timer, and the hard short there blew out the mains fuse. So there was a day or so while I waited to go get new fuses for that, reinstalled those, double checked the harness because I couldn't get the fans working this last time, but now they are running, and the other 2 amp fuses blew up in the process, and I'm not sure what the hell happened there, so I just double checked everything was good, reinstalled new fuses, and worked fine after that. And now when I use the buttons here, I can actually make the heads, or make the spindles move, and I can actually control their speed and so forth with this control, but it'll turn itself off because this is not retracted. In fact, all of these were really sticky when I got it. This one here wouldn't even go back here. This one here, if you put it up, would go right, would not flip back. Same with over here and over here. It's a bunch of plungers inside. So yeah, a little bit of sewing machine oil just to lube them up, not like saturate them. And it works fantastic again. The heads cleaned up very, very well. For 4,000 hours, they really don't look all too bad. So there may still be life in them. But the better part, the whole head assembly is now solid in place. It wasn't just the 2 bolts on this side here for the studs. There was also one in the middle for another stud, and underneath yet another bolt for that stud was loose. Once those all tightened up, it became nice and rock solid. Whether or not it's still aligned, we still have to look into because I still don't have tape for this thing yet. There's something in the mail, but it'll be a while. And then I attached up all of the meters, and as you can see, I don't know if it's just a whole bunch of burned out bulbs or something, but I'm only getting channels 17 to 21, 23, and 24 lit up. The rest of them are totally dead, even though they're plugged in. I'll keep playing around with that. Yeah, I don't know. Actually, I haven't tested that. Maybe I should just swap around the cabling for the meters and see what happens. Maybe it'll change lights and it'll indicate there's something wrong elsewhere in the system. But otherwise, now it's all running, it's all happy, everything's clean, it's just about spotless, and it's ready to go. Remote control is also now running. Let me just flip it on. Where's that power switch? There we go. And it was a bit of a strange case. You picked it up and it rattled. And on the inside, I found that there was 3 boards that had worked themselves loose. And that was fun reattaching. And again, more missing screws, more broken screws just not being there. I'm not entirely sure who'd used this, but it was well abused. And actually, all of these little indents around the buttons to protect them, they're all worn, so it's seen a lot of use. I can understand 4,000 hours of use on this thing. And the controller seems to work quite well. All the LEDs on this thing work. There we go. Yeah, they all work fine. There are a couple segments on these LEDs which are not really behaving right. I don't know if they're burned out or what. They're probably burned out because these are really old. But I can load just about any location here, and I can enter them on the keyboard. You get the idea. Or I can actually load from the tape position. In this case here, it's actually 0 because it's not receiving any tape data. And I find that strange. If I go and I spin one of the capstan timers, nothing happens. Okay, how about we go in here and I use the edit to do this, and it just kind of locks it in place. And then we'll go over to the remote here and I will do start. And technically it should work. There we go. And it keeps on going back to 9951, 9959. I don't know if it's because I don't actually have a tape in it and there's a whole bunch of other timings that it's not getting and it's giving like an error or something like that, but I'm not entirely sure about that. But most of the controls here work. And their light bulbs are okay. I think there's the start button here has its bulb burnt out, and I think the start button over on the tape machine also. No wait, actually the start button light on this one isn't even there. The bulb is completely missing, but the whole mechanism is fantastic. And there it was still sticking again. Just a little tiny bit there that it's not happy about, but yeah, I start it, and all the entire mechanism seems to behave fine. But it's really up to a tape now to verify the validity of my work that I've done a good enough job, and of course to get the Pro Tools machine running as well. Still working on those boxes, but there's not a whole hell of a lot I can do with the boxes either until I get the cabling made. But now that I've finished rambling on, we're done. Yeah, actually, one last thing, speaking of cables here, note the massive umbilical that's used to connect up to the remote. Now, I would have assumed that this would have also supplied, along with everything else that needs to be remote, power. Unfortunately, it doesn't. Power comes in through its own separate connector, and in this case here, I have said cable running into the other room to one of the 220-volt connections for my SGI. My question is, if this is a remote control, why in the living hell do we need to have another connection for power. Just run it over the damn umbilical. There was a cable someone had zap strapped onto it when I got it, but it was like 10 feet shorter than the actual umbilical. So I might look into running a brand new cable from the remote tied to the umbilical through some sort of strapping other than zap straps, because oh my god, those are really sharp and painful on the hands. And I'll have to build some sort of Y cable for the very heavy, for the back of the tape machine, so that power comes in and I'll have a Y cable that'll pass it into the tape machine, but also has a line that comes out, and so I can follow into the remote. And if I'm really lucky, I can actually feed it through the existing cable sheathing. But that's another project once I get everything else set up.